Yes, good morning, Chair Esquivel,
Morning.
members of the board. Thank you for having us here today. I'm Chris Schutz with the California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance. Our panel generally today deals with responses to alternatives 5A, 5B, and 6 of the draft staff report. I'll start with an overview. Mr. Nelson will follow with discussion of protecting existing flows, a topic suggested by alternative 6A. Mr. Reese will follow with technical discussion, primarily of alternatives 5A and 6A, and Ms. Ralston will conclude with some legal discussion. Modular alternatives 5A and 5B attempt to answer the need to meet Delta water quality and flow objectives during very dry years and dry year sequences, applicable either under the VA or the regulatory pathway. Staff apparently conceived of alternative 6A as a means to protect baseline flows to which the VA purports to add what it terms flow assets. The concepts, all of them, have value in the context of regulatory requirements, and that is how we're recommending that the board should evaluate them. They embody important policy requirements, prioritizing Delta standards over temporary urgency changes and responding in part to the overappropriation of the Bay Delta system. Alternative 5A and 5B appear to have been informed largely by the board's response to critically dry years 2014 and 2015. Alternative 5A would curtail non-CVP or state water project water rights in order of priority if the projects could not meet Delta water quality and flow requirements. This is basically the all or nothing curtailment approach the board applied to many water rights in 2014 and 2015. The draft staff report characterizes it as an expansion of standard water right permit term 91. Though not called out in the draft program of implementation, alternative 5B has a different approach to the same problem. It recalls the approach the board applied to urban water agencies in 2014 and 2015, which required defined reductions in water use on an agency by agency basis based on existing use, historical reduction of use, climate, and other factors. In a sense, it required reductions in water use based on an entity's impacts on the public trust. As an expanded policy strategy, it would need to address agricultural as well as urban use and would need to prioritize different kinds of use, such as, in some measure, prioritizing municipal and industrial use over agricultural use. Note that if a percent of unimpaired flow requirement were implemented for delta inflow, this would vastly reduce the need for deployment of either 5A or 5B because in most circumstances, delta flow requirements and salinity and other water quality requirements would be met. Any change in responsibility for meeting delta water quality and flow requirements has risks. The greatest risk is that non-project water users could end up backfilling irresponsible water deliveries and management by the projects. The regulatory approach has a built-in safeguard against irresponsible management by the projects, carryover storage. The VA has no such safeguard. There are no carryover storage requirements within it. To this slide, I'll add that the second law of holes is when you stop digging, you're still in a hole. To its credit, the draft staff report called out the fact that far more water rights exist in the Central Valley than water exists to serve those rights. For the first time I remember, staff highlighted the significance of this imbalance. Simple fact is that it is much easier to never give than to take away. In cognitive science, this is known as the endowment effect. New diversions threaten to gulp up more and more of what's left of unregulated delta inflow and outflow. This has to end under regulatory path. Allowing new diversions under the VA would mean that the new diversions would recapture most or all of the VA flow additions, and in some instances, if implemented and the VA is continued over time, would make them net subtractions. As I and my colleagues have stated repeatedly, the board should apply a regulatory update of the Bay Delta Plan. In that framework, there are many details to work through. However that shakes out, it is appropriate as a policy matter to treat new diversions more stringently than existing diversions. I've noted a couple of important details in this slide. State filed applications in part were established to provide the opportunity for counties of origin to have enough water for their development if and when they needed more water. New assignments of state filings for these purposes should be considered existing diversions. In this context, with an important caveat, water rights so established should not allow the sale of water out of the originating counties. State filings newly assigned or expanded to enable the projects or similar statewide water development should be treated as new diversions in this context. Also, if water rights upstream of RIN dams were generally not assigned responsibility or assigned less responsibility for meeting delta inflow and outflow, new diversions upstream of RIN dams should probably be subject to the responsibility to full responsibility for delta inflow and outflow. They'd be taking more water away, and in that circumstance, treatment as new diversions would be appropriate. Finally, assigning a January to June NDOI minimum bypass flow of 42,800 feet is another valid approach. At minimum, it would be a good interim approach that the board could implement immediately without waiting to work out the details of the Bay Delta Plan update and the program of implementation. There are major new diversions looming, including a likely gold rush for water rights to replenish groundwater. DWR's proposed alternative 6A to delay protection for 8 years is a race to the bottom. And it is not simply a matter of whether these new projects will be implemented within 8 years. They will go through water rights processes. Some of them are already underway. And what is contemplated in those water rights processes is going to include or not include some kind of measure to protect delta inflow and outflow as those water rights in particular are considered. DWR's proposed adaptive management is a good demonstration of a flawed approach to adaptive management. You don't wait to see what you need to do and then do something because you somehow divine what's going to happen. You give it your best shot using the best available science right now developed already by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And then if you do additional experimentation or evaluation, or if new science comes up, then you give DWR the opportunity to come to the board and change the number. And the whole construct of what DWR has proposed is, from my perspective, a bait and switch. The question is what is in excess for the VAs is whether the purported additions are additions or partial additions or subtractions in the net. The VA parties were the ones who set it up that way. I'll point out that Dr. Chilmacurry's slide shown this morning shows that if 42,800 CFS were to be the threshold, new diversions could divert about 1/3 of the time in the January through June period. That seems more than generous in an over-appropriated system. In summary, alternative 5A and 6B alternative 5B and alternative 6A are good foundations on which to build protections under a regulatory update of the Bay Delta Plan. They incorporate important and necessary policy improvements that the board needs to make. There are a lot of details to work out, but as I suggested previously, doing something now and then fine-tuning it would be one way to avoid having to delay until all the details of everything were worked out. Last slide, please. Thank you very much. There's a nice picture of the Tuolumne River. Hopefully soon we'll have more fish in it.